Oh, kia ora. Joe Trinder here from the Southern Cross News. And today we've got our special guest, Andy Oakley. Andy, if you could please introduce yourself.
Okay, Joe. Well, my name's Andy Oakley, obviously. I grew up in Cannons Creek. I spent my first 20 years in Cannons Creek, growing up alongside Polynesians. At some point in my life growing up there, actually, Europeans were a minority. So my friends and family are all mixture. I got into a lot of problems in Cannons Creek. It's, for those who don't know, it's one of New Zealand's lowest socio-economic areas. And so in my teenage years, like many people in my neighbourhood, I got into a lot of problems. And those problems sort of right through our family. But, look, I made it through. I got a job. I became an engineer. I spent my life engineering. I do separate my politics and my work life, so just hopefully that comes out through this interview. And I've got to mix with some fairly high-profile people. So I have a good mixture of dealing with very poor people from Cannons Creek and my family, and some pretty high-level executives. So I think that grounds me quite well. That's a short rundown anyway, Joe.
Andy, so you've written 2 books?
That's correct. They're on the wall behind me. Actually, Joe, I've written 3. 2 are published through Tross Publishing, and one of them I've got on Amazon. Actually, all these books are really about identity, and the title of the first one behind me there is Cannons Creek to Waitangi. It's a bit of it shows a little bit about my journey through Cannons Creek and becoming interested in the Treaty of Waitangi. And the second book, and that book details a treaty claim I made in 2013. And I don't know, Joe, whether you know that's what that book is, and it details the letters that I wrote it details my claim that I made to the Waitangi tribunals and the letters that went between the tribunal and myself. And the second book, Once We Were One, The Fraud of Modern Separatism, I really wrote that because I thought if there was a court case or if there was a claim case in the Waitangi Tribunal as a result of the claim that I made, that I would need the evidence to back up all the things that I said. So the second book, Once We Were One, The Fraud of Modern Separatism, that's what that book is. And for those who read it, they're both in the library. Not so much sold in the big bookstores, Paper Plus and Whitcoulls. They were until they were taken down through Television One's hit piece on Tross Publishing. But yeah, so those are 2 books. And the third book is an extension of that. It's because they're about identity, who we are, how we define ourselves. The third one sort of really went further on and thought, and there's a definition of what are we as humans. So, and that's a really tough subject to write about. So I published it on Amazon. That one's called The Alien Cell Hypothesis. But only I've done that because I can go in there and I can update it. It's really difficult subject matter to cover. So that's not published. It's not in the genre of what Tross are interested in. So I've just published it myself.
So going into Tross Publishing, I've done some research into Tross, and I probably wrote the first news article on Tross Publishing. They seem to have an overwhelming kind of criticism of Te Ao Māori, and I've noticed that they don't seem to get any of their books peer-reviewed.
No, well, I wouldn't expect books, non-fiction books, to be peer-reviewed. They're not so much papers. It's not my experience. I know personally most of the authors. There's some new ones coming on now. And I can tell you, Joe, that I wouldn't be mixing with people who I thought weren't respectful of Māori. I understand if you mix in circles and there is a narrative about Tross, that you might believe those things, and I respect that people believe mostly what they hear. So, but as I say, I know these people personally, and I don't find any of them disrespectful to Māori. I find that Actually, it's the other way around. They're interested in the history of New Zealand mostly. There are other children's books and there are other types of books in TROS, but I guess you're talking about the ones that specifically deal with New Zealand history. So yeah.
So I've noticed with
I think that
Andy, I've noticed with TROS Publishing, they appear to have a general consensus of their books appear to have a pro-colonial narrative, and none of them seem to take a pro Maori perspective or any Maori perspective.
I think this is just me speaking. Obviously, it's just my opinion. I think probably what you're getting here is if you look at our school system and you look at our all of our education system and our government system and our media, which is a massive narrative, isn't it? It's that combined as a massive narrative. They are primarily pro Maori, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And you have this tiny amount of people in TROS and other people, and that number is growing, are saying, well, hang on a minute, why don't we talk about our true history? And I don't think that the history that they're talking about is necessarily anti-Maori. They're trying to get, and as I try to do in my books, is I try to get to the truth. That's what I'm interested in. And look, sometimes the truth is hard to digest, particularly if you're in an education system where you are learning this about our history and someone comes along and says something totally different. Often they're not liked, and it's tough to try and get to the truth. And I found that myself with being asked to speak at various venues. I remember I was asked once to speak at Kapiti College about this foreshore and seabed, and so they contacted me and asked me to speak, and they must have, I don't know whether they did some further research or I prepared a presentation. I was prepared to go along there and give them a slightly different view of it, which you would think schools should do. But they rang me and said, no, look, we've decided that we don't think the school kids can handle what you're going to say. They might be, it might hurt them. The words that I say might hurt them. So they cancelled it. And I had another speaking engagement. I won't say exactly where, but because they might wish to not be named, but that was cancelled as well. So a lot of the talks that people contact me, for some reason or other, they get cancelled because they don't want to hear another version of either history or whatever the issue is.
So Andy,
yeah.
Just before you mentioned modern day separatism, can you explain to me how that began?
The title of my second book, The Fraud of Modern Separatism. The title itself doesn't say everything about the book. I'm talking about separatism today, right? I'm talking about the growing recent separatism, possibly over the last, since the mid 70s, the 80s, something like that. So I'm talking about that time. That's what I mean by modern separatism, and that's been talked about by a lot of people. Don Brash, who I know reasonably well, he mentioned it in this 2004 Orewa speech. It's been mentioned many times. Actually, a lot of what I began saying in 2013 in my first book, and have continued to say, is now coming from the Deputy Prime Minister. So it's taken 10 years, but I think if anything, people are becoming aware that we are becoming the dangers of becoming a separatist country.
Can I ask if you've ever experienced a situation where you felt that you're in public, you felt that there was separatism happening, and you were treated as a second-class citizen? Yeah,
that's what the reason of my first book is. the Treaty of Waitangi in Article 3 states that all New Zealanders should have equal rights. And so I tried to make a claim to the Waitangi Tribunal, saying that I don't have the same rights as Māori people. Article 3 states that all people in New Zealand should have equal rights. And I think what they're doing, banning anyone except Māori from having a claim, the result of which is many millions of dollars, they banned me from having a claim. I'm not allowed. So, yeah, I'm really annoyed about that. And for those who are interested in the letters that came back out of the Waitangi Tribunal, it's laughable that these people operate through the Ministry of Justice. And what they did to me was nothing short of discrimination. So, yeah, I felt it a lot. I felt it when I get banned from speaking. That I think, well, if I was a Māori, I would be welcomed along. In fact, that's what was supposed to happen at Kapiti. There was supposed to be a local iwi person talking about their view and me talking about an opposite view or a different view. And the school thought, no, we can't have this opposite view. We cannot have Andy Oakley's view because he's not a Māori. So I was discriminated against, and it was only the local iwi that went in there and spoke. So, yeah, many times, Joe, many times.
Okay, so you've just quoted that that Article 3 says that all New Zealanders should have the same rights and privileges. From what I know, it says in Te Treaty of Waitangi that Māori would have the same rights and privileges as British subjects, and there are 9 documents on Te Treaty of Waitangi, and only of the treaty documents. Now they've all got separate names, and there is one that's in English out of those 9 documents, and that's the Treaty of Manukau Kawhia. Now that one there, it also says that that the natives of New Zealand would have the same rights and privileges. So we know that they're talking about tangata whenua, Māori, Indigenous New Zealanders. They're not talking about the descendants of British colonists who are British New Zealanders of the 21st century. How did you come to the conclusion that Article 3 was about your demographic?
No, it's not about my demographic. It's about all the people of New Zealand, ngā tangata katoa. So if we just talk about that English sheet that you're talking about that came from, which had the signatures of the chiefs at Waikato Heads. So on April the 17th, 11th, don't quote me on that, something like that, April 7th, 1840, Reverend Mortsel went to the Waikato Heads and he called a meeting of about 1,500 chiefs or 1,500 people, I'm not quite sure, either. And on that day, the official treaty, the long form treaty that could take all the signatures, wasn't there. So he read to them from the printed sheet, which is a small sheet. And if you look in the treaty documents, you'll see that on that sheet there's about 7 signatures, and they ran out of room. So that's what was read to the chiefs of at Waikato Heads. They would not have understood a word of anything read to them in English. It's a long way from Waitangi, where some of them could speak English. So Hobson forbade people to read the English treaty to natives. So that didn't happen, Joe. That paper, if you look at the treaty documents, has a red seal in the top left-hand corner, I think. It was stuck behind it. It received the signatures of the chiefs at Waikato, further 37 or so, I think. And it was pinned behind the printed sheet, which was read to them and contains the first five or so signatures. And that's what's put into the suitcase. You must admit, if someone read the English treaty to a group of people in Waikato, almost nobody would understood it. Hobson forbade it. So that treaty was never read to anybody, and there is no English treaty that was read to any of the chiefs or natives that subsequently signed it. So, no, the treaty is addressed to all the people of New Zealand, the tangata katoa. So that means everybody.
Yeah, but the treaty signed in 1840, are you not taking it out of context that it isn't about people who would immigrate here after the 6th of February? Because it says the word natives. I mean, do you not accept that that's not about British New Zealanders of the 21st century, that it is about the one ethnicity that dominated this country in 1840?
No, I disagree, Joe. The word native is not in either the English draft or the Te Reo document. What's interesting, if you look at the early notes that Hobson made, he was using the word natives in there, and the later notes, the last draft, James Busby took the word natives out. He specifically took them out. So it seems to me that Reverend Taylor and Colenso and a number of others had meetings and decided that in the final draft they would remove the word native and replace it with the people of New Zealand. All the people of New Zealand, the people of New Zealand. And the other thing that you may not be aware of, in 1840 there is no noun Māori with a capital M. And so if you look at the 1840 treaty documents, all 9 sheets, or the 8 that are in Māori, none of them have the word Māori with a capital M. And if you read literature, which I've researched thoroughly when I was doing the books, I could not find anywhere prior to 1840 anyone using the noun Māori. It didn't exist. In 1840, the word Māori was an adjective. It simply meant ordinary as opposed to something higher. And that's the context of the word used in the treaty. So I've studied the linguistics quite deeply, Joe.
So you refuse to accept that in Article 3 it says tangata Māori, Māori people.
Māori, but if you look at the 1840 treaty documents, the word Māori has a small m. It's an adjective meaning ordinary. And in the context of the treaty, ordinary, it means ordinary as opposed to something higher, pretty much how what it means in the English language as well, ordinary as opposed to something special or something higher. And in the treaty, the something higher is rangatira. So ordinary people as opposed to rangatira. In the treaty, that's how it's used.
Have you seen...
It's not that I refuse to accept it. It's just that those are the facts. If you read the papers, all the word Māori is small m. And you will not find in any dictionary or book written between, there's lots of them that I've read between 1800 and 1840, no one talks about Māori. So the context of New Zealand then is separate tribes, separate nations. They're not all one people and never have been, and still not today.
I think, Andy, what you've done is you've taken the word Māori out of context to think that it refers to ordinary. So imagine that you are a Māori person and you live in a country that's 99% Māori, and so you wouldn't refer to other people from foreign nations, well, as anything, because the word Māori would just mean normal. Like it would mean normal people. Like everyone around you is Māori, so you would just refer to everyone as normal. Do you kind of see that it still refers to people who are Polynesian people that arrived here in 1250 AD?
So not in 1840. I accept today that a social construct has formed, and that I respect that people today define as Māori. I have no problem with that. People can define any way they wish. But if you're talking about 1840, nobody thought they were Māori. You were Ngāpuhi, Ngāti Toa, whatever. And those other people who lived over there, that's another nation. They're not the same people. If you went back there and asked them, are you all the same people, they wouldn't like you much. So no, they didn't think they were all Māori. The word Māori didn't exist. So the concept of everybody being one people wasn't there in 1840, and that's why we see in the treaty the word is not used.
Have you gone and had the meaning of the word Māori, tangata Māori, Māori, checked off with a te reo Māori linguist expert on their definition
I've
of what it
read.
meant in 1840 and also 2024?
No, you can find dictionaries that tell you that Māori just means ordinary, normal, usual. Yeah, so that's the dictionaries say that. The dictionaries also say that the Dictionary of the Māori Language, even today, I think it's what's the term? Edit number 7, I think. That also says that the meaning Maori as a noun didn't occur to 1860, and I think no, I think I can find it earlier than that. And maybe they mean it became widely used by 1860, but I certainly see people starting to use the word as a noun collectively in mid 1800, maybe 1842. I think in papers past, somebody in Wellington used the term in a newspaper article. But around 1840, 1841, and before that, nobody is talking about all the separate tribes as being one people Maori. That's not how New Zealand's history is. Some people don't like it, but I'm afraid you just have to do the research and you find it yourself, or read my books. I've got the references
So,
there.
if you were to think of this in a logical sense, that you've got, several hundred chiefs here to sign a document, and what they're doing is they're going to offer the same rights and privileges of British subjects to all humanity. Anyone who decides to immigrate here. Does that kind of seem illogical to you? Like, if I owned a country and I was the most powerful people in that nation, it was only my people that were here, why would I sign a document that would offer the same rights and privileges to British subjects as anyone who decided to immigrate here? Does that kind of seem illogical to you? That people would sign up to that?
Don't understand the New Zealand history. Prior to 1840, these tribes, you're not factoring in that these tribes were at war with each other. They hated each other. It was that you can't say that they sat there and said, our people. That's not what happened. Our people to Ngāpuhi meant Ngāpuhi people, or Ngāi Tahu people, or Ngāti Toa people. That's their nation. That's who they are. They're not one people. So that's not even how they looked at the treaty. How they looked at the treaty, particularly the smaller tribes, was by signing it, they were getting the protection of the Queen. And if you remember that through the 1840s anyway, there was about between 1800 and 1840, there was some 633 battles between these tribes, and a lot of lives were being lost. And so a lot of, particularly the smaller tribes, were interested in being protected. So they're not thinking the way you've just described it, that we're going to hand sovereignty to another people. That's not how they looked at it, and that's not the reasons they signed the treaty.
So I've noticed that a lot of your work has been pro-colonial and anti-Indigenous rights. So how do you know that you've managed to get the intent of the rangatira that signed the treaty? Because it seems really misguided that you'd sign a document where you would offer humans, universal suffrage to all humanity, and not protect your own interests. They're just like, who would do that?
They were getting property rights. They were getting the law. They were getting protection. So there's lots of good reasons that they signed the treaty. And also, I'd say, Joe, that no, I don't have the intent of everybody that signed the treaty. I don't believe anybody does, because everyone who signed that treaty is an individual, and they signed it for their own reasons. And so, just to have a wide, sweeping statement that they didn't, they didn't sign it for this reason, or they all signed it for that. I mean, that's not sensible, is it? I mean, 542 chiefs signed that document, and each of them are individuals. You can't sit there and say, I know why every one of them signed it, and it's the same reason for all of them. That's just ridiculous.
So you you said there that Māori signed the Treaty of Waitangi for property rights. Why would you sign the property rights when you already own property, all the property? You own 66 million acres of real estate, and the other guy you're signing up with owns nothing. Like that's also illogical. Why would they sign up to property rights when they already own lots of it?
No, so again, you're grouping everybody together, all the Maori people together, and it's not like that. The Waikato tribes occupied land, but there was no. You can't have ownership without law, right? So you can occupy land, you can think it's your land, but you can't have. There is no ownership. There is no even rights. Nobody can have any rights without the law, and that's what article was giving the people of New Zealand, was giving them law, and that's how you have rights. You cannot own something, you do not have rights without law, and that was a problem in New Zealand for everybody. I think it was a problem for whether Europeans living here or Ngāpuhi or Waitaha or whatever. If there's no rights there, what was happening is large tribes were travelling around the country and killing people and taking their land. For instance, in Porua, Ngāti Tawa came down from Kapiti and killed everybody. The Ngāti Ira tribe, they wiped them out. They had no rights. And then Ngāti Tawa sold their land. So that's what you needed the law to have ownership. And I don't think that pre-law in New Zealand that people owned things as you're trying to make out. Yeah, occupied thing.
So you've just tried to describe that that Aotearoa prior to 1840 was lawless and barbaric. But according to information I know of, we had a system called tikanga, where there was certain customs, where there was respect amongst hapu iwi, and this was a system of law. It wasn't as barbaric as, say, Napoleonic England, where millions of people are dying every moment on battlefields. There's wars raging across Europe. There's people dying from disease left, right, and centre. Venereal disease. I mean, Britain was it was a cesspool of disease. There was low life expectancy. It's kind of hard to describe what's a utopia Aotearoa prior to 1840 compared to Britain, which was just a war-ridden, diseased kind of cesspit.
So, yeah, look, what you're doing is the opposite of what you accuse me of, right? So you accuse me of being pro-colonial. I'm not at all. And now you're being anti-colonial by trying to compare the two systems. And I wouldn't do that. Look, I know that there were massive problems in Britain. My family probably left there for some of those reasons. I don't talk it up. But what I would say is the system of government that came out of Britain and was the treaty tells us that they wanted this system here, particularly the law, the property, and the protection of, for all sorts of reasons. The French, the threatened French annexation, and various other reasons. And as I said, each of the chiefs would have signed the treaty for their own reasons that we don't know. But we can think of some, and some of us would be right, and some of us wouldn't. But no, the British certainly had some problems, and mass migration here is an example of that. So I agree with you that in Britain there's problems, but I wouldn't, and I never do try and have a competition between what was happening in Israel not Israel, but the Middle East in 1700s and what. This is not a competition. This is just history, and we need to understand it.
So I've spoken a couple of days ago to experts on Te Treaty of Waitangi, Professor Margaret Mutu, and she explained it to me this way, that the Treaty of Waitangi, when it came to governance and law, there was no need for the chiefs to invite the British Empire in to offer laws, because they had their own legal system, their own laws, and what the intention was for the British and Hobson to govern the British tourists that had come over to Aotearoa, because they had run amok and they were running brothels up in Kororakaka. They were just running amok and they were lawless. And a lot of them were convicts from Australia, and they were really disrupting Māori society. And so the intent was for the chiefs and tribes to get Hobson to govern his own people, as opposed to try and govern the power structure that was already here. And that seems logical, as in, why would anyone sign away their own authority?
Because, as I said, that it's not one people. And by the way, I'm sure that Margaret Mutu would say that. And the unfortunate thing, though, is there are no treaty documents that back that up. I think what she might have done is she might have looked at or read the Lord Normanby's long form instructions for the treaty, and you can see in there that he's talking about the lawlessness, and he does talk about the lawlessness of the escapees from Australia and wherever else, and we know that's a fact. But if she carried on reading, she would also see that lawlessness was a state of New Zealand, and so there was lawlessness everywhere. And the battles, the 633 of them, and the 35,000 people that were killed in those battles is a testament to that. So, you're trying to paint, or perhaps Margaret Mutu is trying to paint a picture of wonderfulness here, but we know there was major problems. I mean, the history is there. The battles are all there for everybody to see. And I would say that sort of behaviour is not just in New Zealand. You can go back into Scotland, if you go back in some of my heritage, and you'll see these things happen all over the world. They're happening in the Middle East right now. So it's not something down to Māori. And again, I would point out that when you group everybody together back then, right, and say that they're all the same, they all think the same. Like Margaret Mutu is a bit guilty there of grouping everybody together and making wide sweeping statements and saying it applied to everybody. They all thought this way. That's not logical, Joe. That's not logical at all.
So, Andy, look, what you've done is you've described that 1800s Māori society was very chaotic. Most Māori academics would absolutely disagree with you. We had a system called tikanga. And another thing that I've noticed you've done is you've managed to over-embellish the musket wars in a kind of a white saviour mentality that portraying a kind of a history where Māoridom was chaotic, it was lawless, when the history I've heard about is actually really ordered. It runs on a system of tikanga, and there was a lot of respect between different hapu and iwi, and it wasn't this kind of civil war that you're describing. In fact, the English and the French went to war for 1,000 years on and off, and one war lasted 100. I mean, how can the English lecture anyone about warfare?
I don't think the English are lecturing anybody about warfare, and I think that while there's many reasons why the British, put the treaty into New Zealand to see if they wanted the British system, again, you're trying to compare things, and that's not the right way to look at things. The right way to look at things is to imagine that you are a Ngāpuhi person in a Ngāpuhi environment, and you're not thinking about Waitaha or any other tribe, any other nation. How you view your life is within your tribe, your hapu or whatever. That's how the majority of people live. There's no internet there. Their outlook is from their tribe out, and they certainly had their enemies, and they certainly got on with a lot of people as well. I'm not saying, this is another thing, something about white or English judging people. That's not what's going on here. All I'm doing is detailing the battles that happened between the various tribes here. I don't even call them Māori tribes. It's Ngāpuhi versus whoever. That's what I see. I don't see, and I don't go around saying. I know some people do, but I don't. I don't go around saying Māori had wars with each other. That's not what I think. What I think is some tribes were warrior tribes and would travel to various places, to where I'm sitting right now, and there would be major wars between the people of the region who had been here for some time and the invading army. What do they call it? I don't know. Is it Tawa? So you're trying to say that didn't happen. Both things happened, Joe. There was tikanga that worked wonderfully, probably within a tribe and sometimes between tribes. I totally accept that. But without law and order between these tribes, there was major problems, and that is borne out in history that none of us can change. Ron Crosby does a very good job of detailing all those battles in his book, The Musket Wars. So I'm glad for the people of New Zealand, not Māori, not Pākehā, but I'm glad for the people of New Zealand that was ended. And that's my...
So, Andy, you've come to the conclusion that different iwi had different intentions. Have you gone and sat down on marae, spoken with rangatira, and really investigated with them and interviewed them on their tupuna's intentions when they were signing the treaty? Because I have a lot of Māori friends, and they've told me their hapu's intentions of the era into the 21st century, how their grandparents felt about it, or their hapu and iwi felt about it, on their intentions around signing the Treaty of Waitangi. Have you done the due diligence? Have you gone out? Have you interviewed different iwi to come to this conclusion that iwi were opposed to each other and they didn't have a general consensus?
I don't need to talk to modern day people, to find out the intentions of the groups who had warfare in 1836. That's not going to help me. What I do for that is read history books, a wide variety of them, right? From the early books that are in Auckland University, through Ron Crosby's books, through Michael King's, all sorts of places, and then I put my own view on this, and that's what historians do. And I purposely put a different view on it because that's my view. I'm reading what the people at the time are saying, and I'm forming views and opinions, and then I reference those books from the past in the books that I write. If I were to go to talk to various iwi, I'm sure that within that iwi I would get different views, and that's because we're individuals, and each person is allowed to have their own opinions on what happened. I have many friends who are from the local tribes and from tribes around the place, and they all have different opinions, and some agree with me and some don't, and that's fine. But Joe, what you're doing is you're sort of cancelling out this, probably one of the major parts of our history, which is the death and destruction around tribal warfare, and you're trying to say it didn't happen. Look, what I agree with is that it's not just warfare; it's wonderfulness mixed with that I'm sure people experienced in their daily lives at that time, and major trauma. And the same goes all over the world, Joe. If you think about other places in the world where there are wars today, they've gone from wonderful times to bad times. You can't dismiss those wars.
Yeah, from what I've seen, from most of those who are pro-colonial have an opinion, is they love to embellish the musket wars, and they talk about a near extermination of Māoridom, but they can never provide any statistics because there was no one taking any statistics. There's basically no statistics department. So they're just speculating about a death toll, and they love to over embellish it for kind of like a white savior mentality that we came and we saved you Māoris from yourselves. But what we do know is within 50 years of signing Te Treaty of Waitangi, 52% of the Māori population perished because they actually did have statistics, and they're written down, they're recorded on the Māori population. Do you feel that you're over embellishing the musket wars and the death toll?
No, I'm saying that we shouldn't forget one of the most important parts of our history, and I agree with you, Joe, that if you counted people who define as Maori or who you define as Māori, their population did continue to drop after the treaty and so after the signing of the treaty. And probably one of the most prominent people to do work on that is Dr. John Robinson, who is a professor of statistics from MIT. And I'm not talking about Manukau Institute, I'm talking about Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he's used Paul, who is a well-known early statistician. He's used his figures and come up with very well put together figures so that we can see at a high level. And he did that work for the Treaty of Waitangi, for the Waitangi Tribunal, who subsequently told him to change his figures, otherwise he wouldn't get paid. And he's since admitted that he did. So there are some very high level figures to look at. The reason for the continued decline of the Māori population was that during the wars, the sheer amount of men that were lost meant that there wasn't enough babies being born. But luckily, that recovered. And I think if you look at the period between and here's what I think we should be looking at, Joe, and we shouldn't be looking back at the past. I think and I've done this work myself, I've looked at the economic performance, the productivity of New Zealanders from 1840 to the 1970s. And from 1840 to 1900, New Zealand overtook both the US and Australia in terms of productivity per capita. And I have the figures for that. And it didn't stop there. From 1900 to 1950, New Zealand continued to be a prosperous nation. It was the most per capita, the most productive country. Probably another reason why my family came out. It was one of the safest countries, and the prosperity of the people of New Zealand. I mean, at that time in the 50s and 60s, a single man could bring up a family of a wife and 4 kids, and together they could buy a house. So, I mean, these were wonderful times, and that's what we should be celebrating, that when we came together as a nation, when all those different tribes, including all the people of New Zealand, which is what the treaty says, came together and built a nation together, we overtook almost the entire Western world. And that's what our children should be celebrating. And I spend a lot of time talking about that because it's a wonderful part of our history. I don't spend too much time talking about the battles in the past. I may have clarified it in my books. I was interested in it, so I documented it. But I want to spend much more time these days talking about the successes that we had. And I remember in Cannons Creek and Ngāti people that moved down to work in the factories and used to babysit me. These people were a better family than mine. I tell you, they were.
Hey, Andy, can we go back to that economic prosperity that you were talking about, where it was mega, it was make Aotearoa great again, and the country was prosperous. I've just read a book called "We Don't Serve Māori Here," and the other day I went and interviewed a man called Masi Hiku, and he lived in a segregated society that practiced apartheid in Pukekohe. It sounds like it was absolutely make Aotearoa great again for British colonists. But for Māori, they were treated as second-class citizens. They weren't allowed in stores. They had to go into segregated movie theatres. They were second-class citizens. They were discriminated in the most cruelest ways. Do you think that life was so wonderful for Māori back then when New Zealand was economically so powerful?
I think what you're talking about is some incidences. Is it Pukekohe? Is that where it
Yes.
was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the
So
epicenter.
I watched a documentary, and I've done a little bit of research on that. And I think that what you're pointing out is, yeah, there's been some people in New Zealand who don't treat others very well, and when they do it with their skin color or that sort of stuff, I totally disagree with it. And so if any of that is true, I totally disagree with it. I think what you'll find is there's two sides of the story, though. And if there are unruly people who are, I don't know, it's I don't know if I'm right here, Joe, but I can imagine a situation where if gang members are causing trouble in your community, that you might ban all gang members from coming into your shop. So I don't know whether that was what it was, but I certainly don't condone that. But I just gave you some incidences, and which continue today, which people who are not Maori are not allowed to deal with the Waitangi Tribunal. They're discriminated against. I'm not allowed to speak in certain schools in the education system. Television One put my face all over the news. They discriminate against me, and they say, so yeah, bad things happen to people, Joe. But you know what? I just get on. We talked a bit before we started. I don't really care. I've got more important things to worry about. People calling me names and not allowing me to speak or to enter or have equal rights. I just rally against them. I don't. I don't let it hurt me too much.
Okay, Andy, well, thanks for joining us today for a really interesting interview. Kia ora.
All right, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much.
Kia ora.